1 million years ago, at the mouth of a cave on the edge of what is now the Kalahari Desert, someone woke up before the rest of the group because it was their turn to watch the fire. It had burned down to a bed of coals overnight. The job was to break up the crust with a stick, lay on the smallest dry twigs, get down close to the ground, and blow steadily until the first flame came back. If it had gone out, everything else about that day would have been worse. That was the first task of the morning, and it came before food. The second task was wood. A fire that burns all night eats an armload of fuel, and every armload has to be found, broken to length, dragged back and stacked somewhere dry. So the day started with people fanning out from camp with nothing in their hands, coming back with as much as they could carry and doing it again. Near a camp that has been used for a while, there is no loose wood left. The dead branches within easy reach get taken first. Then the ones a little farther out, and the walk gets longer every week. Groups often moved camp not because the game had thinned or the water had dried up, but because there was nothing left to burn within a reasonable walk. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our future documentaries. Thank you for your support. Now, let's continue. With the fire fed, the group split up. Some went out after meat, carrying wooden spears cut to the proportions of a modern javelin. Others went for plants, digging tubers and roots out of the ground with sharpened sticks, collecting seeds, cracking nuts open on stone anvils that got pitted from years of it. Those digging sticks were made with fire. In Tuscany, 171,000 years ago, people were cutting them from boxwood, the hardest wood in Europe, and charring the outer surface in the flames so that the burnt layer could be scraped away with stone. Working that wood any other way is close to impossible, and someone stayed behind with the fire. That is a detail worth sitting with. Before anyone could make a flame, a person had to be assigned to the fire every single day, sheltering it from wind, keeping it fed, keeping it from spreading. That person did not hunt and did not gather. The group carried them. It is one of the oldest arrangements in human life, and it existed because the alternative was losing everything. By late afternoon, whatever had been killed came back to the fire rather than being eaten where it fell. That change is enormous and easy to miss. An animal opened up at the fire is an animal that gets shared. The carcass was carried in, skinned with flint flakes cut apart, and put on the coals or on stones heated beside them. Long bones were cracked open for the marrow and set near the heat until it softened. Roots went straight into the embers and came out edible in minutes, instead of taking an hour of grinding and chewing. Everyone who came back to that fire ate, including the ones who had brought nothing. Then the light went, and the day did not end. That was the strangest thing fire did. Before it, dark meant done. After it, there were hours left over that could not be spent hunting or tracking or gathering, because none of that works at night. So they got spent on everything else. Stone points got fitted onto shafts. In Europe, that meant rolling birch bark tight, burying it beside low heat with the air kept out, and cooking a black tar out of it for hours, which is glue strong enough to lock flint to wood. Hides got scraped soft with the edge of a flake, worked back and forth until they stopped being stiff. Plant fibre got rolled against a thigh into cordage. Strips of meat hung in the smoke and dried, and the smoke kept the flies and mosquitoes off the people sitting under it. They sat close together, facing the same small point of light, with their hands busy. Living inside the smoke had a price, and the bones show it. Eyes ran and stung. Soot went into the lungs night after night for a lifetime. In a cave, where the smoke has nowhere to go, the walls and ceiling go black within a few seasons, and so does everything stored under them. Burns were routine. So were children, who had to be taught what the fire was before they were old enough to understand a warning, and who were put to work on it as soon as they were, carrying twigs, feeding the edge of the flames, sitting with it in the afternoon while the adults were gone. Learning to handle fire was probably the first job any human child ever had. When it was time to sleep, they slept on the ground. That is another thing the fire brought. Sleeping in the branches, wedged into a fork and holding on, is what you do when a leopard can reach you. A fire changes that. By 200,000 years ago in southern Africa, people were building actual beds. They cut bundles of grass and laid them on a spread of ash, sometimes working in the leaves of aromatic plants, and when the bedding got dirty or infested with insects, they burned it off and laid down fresh. The whole camp slept in a ring, bodies pointed inward, close enough to feel the heat. Outside the ring of light, the night went on as it always had. Lions hunt in the dark because the dark belongs to them. Hyenas run animals down by moonlight. What kept those animals at the edge was the light itself, the smoke, the noise, and the fact that someone was always awake. Someone was always awake. That was the other half of the fire watch, and it ran all night, every night in shifts. Then came the bad days, hard rain, or a river crossing gone wrong, or a night when whoever was watching fell asleep, and by morning the coals were cold and grey. There was no way to strike a new one. So the group went back to eating raw, back to chewing for a large part of the day, back to sleeping in the trees or in shifts in the open, back to the cold. And then somebody walked. Toward the smoke of another group, or out toward the horizon in the dry season, waiting for lightning to put fire back on the ground. Lightning walks across the grasslands thousands of times in a single storm, and the dry grass takes it. The line moves fast and the animals move ahead of it. Behind it, the ground goes black and quiet and full of food. Seeds sit roasted in the ash. Tortoises are cooked inside their shells where they hid. Small groups walked that burned ground with their heads down, picking up what the flames had already prepared, and at the edge of the burn, where something was still smouldering, they took a branch that was alight at one end and carried it home. When the whole group moved, the fire moved with them. A smouldering knot of fungus, or dried dung, or slow-burning bark packed into a fold of hide or a hollow piece of wood, kept just barely alive over miles of walking. Whoever carried it walked differently from everyone else, checking it, shielding it, blowing on it. At the next camp it went into a nest of dry grass and came back up into flame. Because all of this depended on staying put, camps stopped being places to pass through. Farther north, it was not a convenience at all. In Europe and northern Asia, winter nights run long and drop far below freezing, and a body without shelter and heat does not last them. Groups moved into the mouths of caves and rock shelters, where the overhang held the warmth in and the smoke could still escape, and built their hearths a short way inside. Wood had to be stockpiled before the cold came. Hides had to be worked into clothing, which meant scraping, softening and cutting them, all of it done sitting near heat because fingers stopped working in the cold. Every one of those winters was survived on the strength of a fire that somebody had carried there and kept. 790,000 years ago, on the shore of a lake in what is now northern Israel, a group came back to the same lakeside spot again and again. They burned wild olive, wild grape, and wild barley. They pulled fish out of the water, some of them large, and roasted them. The ground around where the fires sat is dense with flint chips, because knapping stone is close work and the fire is where the light was. 300,000 years ago, in a cave in the same region, the arrangement had hardened into something anyone would recognise as a household. A hearth sat in the middle of the floor, about 43 square feet, the size of a small bathroom, built and burned and rebuilt in exactly the same footprint until the ash stacked up in layers. Deer were butchered in one part of the cave and hides were worked in another. People used that cave and that spot on its floor for tens of thousands of years, and with fire in hand, a few of them went places that make no practical sense at all. 176,000 years ago, a group walked more than 1,000 feet into a cave in southwestern France, far past any daylight, carrying flame the entire way. Down there they broke hundreds of stalagmites off the floor, snapped them into even lengths, stacked them into 2 rings and several small heaps, and lit fires on top of them. Nobody lived in that chamber. There was no water and no food. They walked in, did that, and walked back out. Everything above happened without anyone being able to start a fire. That finally changed in the caves of southwestern France, about 50,000 years ago. The tool was a hand axe, held flat, and the trick was a lump of pyrite, the brassy mineral sometimes called fool's gold. Struck down along the stone at a slant, it throws sparks, sometimes 1, sometimes 10. The sparks are not hot enough to light wood, so the work was in the tinder. Dry fibres, shredded bark, and above all a hoof-shaped fungus that grows on dead birch and beech and holds an ember the way a coal holds heat, all of it arranged in a nest on the ground. Strike and strike again until a spark lands and starts to smoke. Then lift the nest, hold it close to the mouth and blow steadily until it flares. Black lumps of manganese dioxide turn up at those same sites, carried in from outside. Ground to powder and worked into wood shavings, manganese dioxide drops the temperature at which they catch by around 180 degrees Fahrenheit. It cannot make a fire alone. Mixed into tinder, it turns a poor spark into a working one. The kit that came out of all this was small enough to carry on a belt, and one of them survived by accident, a man who died high in the Alps between 3400 and 3100 years before the Common Era was frozen into the ice with his belongings intact. He had flint, lumps of pyrite, and pieces of tinder fungus. Flint, pyrite, tinder. That was the whole answer, and it stayed the standard way to make fire until steel replaced pyrite. Once a fire could be made in a few minutes, nobody had to stay behind to guard one. Camps could be lit anywhere, in any season, in the rain, in the cold, in places no group had ever been able to hold before. The layer of ash at the edge of the Kalahari is 1 million years old. The oldest painting known on any cave wall is about 51,000. By the time anyone knelt in a cave with a lump of charcoal and drew an animal on the rock, people had been feeding fires, carrying embers, and sleeping around coals for roughly 1 million years. And the paintings deep inside the caves were all made by firelight, in chambers where the only way to see the wall was to bring the fire in with you.